right. Well, welcome everybody to our living room, to a little fireside chat. We haven't had one for a while. The last one of these we had was with Chosen, and we'll be doing a Chosen series again here in the near future. But we're happy to have you with us to have a little conversation, because that's really what this is. This book is probably a surprising read for most of you, where you thought, oh my gosh, why did they give me this book? Especially at the beginning. It'll make sense by the end. But if you just read part one, preparation for tonight, you might be thinking, wow, I'm not exactly sure why Cabrini gave me this. So we're going to have this conversation to maybe help you with that, or give you a chance to be a part of the conversation as well. So you probably don't know everybody here. Most of you know me because I stand up in front of you all the time. But Chris will be our moderator tonight. Chris Beeler has been the moderator before on these fireside chats, so we'll let him take it over.
And that simply means when we don't have anything to say, I'm the one that says, Father. And I'm a little bit behind. I'll get this out of the way real quick. Ann Lenz told me we were reading Finding Nemo. So I just started reading this book today. They found him, by the way. Thank you, Ann. So our guests tonight, Ann Amato. These are all Cabriniites. Charlie and Mary Vendetti. And Charlie and Mary were on The Chosen with us once, so Ann has never been on before.
Never.
So millions of people.
Millions.
So
Wants
welcome.
to make me nervous.
Welcome. We'll have a good conversation tonight.
Yeah.
So, chapter 1. Should we just start out like that?
Sure, give initial reactions or those kind of things to the read. Or
What'd you get out of it?
The first part of the book sounds like a fairy tale, that she lived in a fairy tale life. She said her life was wonderful, living, with her brothers and her mom and dad, and they're both very hard workers, and the oldest brother watches out for him when dad's gone, and they go down to the lake and they swim, and it just sounds like she had a wonderful childhood. It also appeared to me that mom and dad really didn't want their kids to have any knowledge of any hardships. And that carries on throughout the whole first section.
Protecting them.
They very much protected him. And I think to myself, as I'm reading this, and you go further into that chapter, I remember things that I probably didn't tell my kids, because it was like, why should they know something that's,
right.
not such good news.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of understand why Dad kind of kept things away from him.
Charlie?
I agree with Dan. I mean, it was like paradise for the kids growing up there. And I think they referred to it as the land of the eternal spring.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And brothers were very protective of her, as was the mother and father protective of all the kids. And the relationship they had with each other was very loving. And they prayed together as a family, and but the protection that the parents provided for the kids was knowing what was happening or going to happen, and then not really acknowledging it as a parent. It was always like, oh, it'll get better, it'll get better. And no, but the first part of the book, I thought, wow, she really lived a fantastic life, like we all would want to. Never saw any discrimination.
No prejudice.
And she
No
didn't even
prejudice.
know when they asked,
No.
those to stand up in the class
Right.
that were Tutsis or Hutus.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't
know.
know what she was even.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes into chapter 2, I guess, because that's when I guess they talked about the fact they had to stand up and identify themselves, which tribe they were from, and the innocence just was amazing to me. How innocent she was, and really almost like in the Garden of Paradise, like, who told you you were a Tutsi or a Hutu? Like they said, who told you you were naked? You know,
Right.
so innocent and pure, and how dumbfounded she would be to have to find out.
I think
And
it's
her
a
dad
perfect
just loved her
example of,
so
you know,
much.
you're not born prejudiced. I mean,
Right.
if you
Right.
don't, these people were absolutely, and it just goes to show you, you know, about how you're raised,
Yeah.
is how, what an effect that has on you. Charlie and I have talked about, Charlie's been in the criminal justice system all his life, and we've talked about before, you know, I won't say all because some people are just wired wrong, but I would say 98% of the people that are in prison probably came from a bad home. You know,
Probably.
I mean,
Probably,
yeah.
the parents are such a big deal. And these people, morals and education
Yep.
was their.
But what surprises me too, as you go on, is her very best friends turned their back on her. And
Later, yeah. when
Yeah,
they
and-
were-
That was
And-
really sad.
Yeah.
That was a sad part.
you know, they're innocent, they're best friends, and I guess it's just how people can be so influenced by other people as to
Right.
prejudices.
Right.
Yeah,
Their
and the
parents-
culture all around them, when it becomes negative toward one group, then
Yes,
we
and they
become
all
negative.
jumped on the bandwagon.
Yeah.
It was,
That's what really, to me, and this is occurring in the early 90s,
Yeah.
and the mindset of a group of people to be so violent, and that living next door to the Hutus, living next door to a Tutsi, or they probably were even intermarried.
Yeah.
And
well, the
then-
priest's wife, she was a
Yes.
Tootsie.
And then to turn on each other, like you said, I believe her name was Janet, was Immaculate's best friend, she thought. And then when she went thinking that Janet would hide her out, and Janet pretty much disgustingly said, just stay away from me, I would never hide a
Right.
Tootsie.
Yeah.
And this is in the 1990s, I mean, it's like, and so that really, to me, and I'm sure that, I think that what's going on in that area of the world now, or in other parts of the world that are similar, that we become aware of. And we've seen some of it in Palestine and Israel.
Right.
And, you know, we only get one side, we don't get
Right, right.
both sides. But the terror that was caused to the Tutsis is just beyond imagination. Then to have it occur by people that you thought loved you
Right.
and were your friends, that,
Well, clearly her parents, in creating that home, being educators themselves, they were very careful about not saying anything negative, because as to who they were or who the others were, it just was not a part of their home life at all. It was-
Now, it turns out they were teachers for everybody.
right.
You know, we were talking about that this morning a little bit. They, you know, all the adult people looked up to them, you know. And I thought too, you know, in chapter 2, they talked about how that even they had suffered from the hands of the Hutu. The parents had. But they still didn't say, stay away from them, they're bad people.
Right.
You know.
And especially when his friend sent him to prison.
The
He
father.
still,
Yeah.
the dad, yeah, and he still was telling his kids, it was the government that made him do it, or he did, you know, didn't blame him at all. The kids didn't believe it though.
No, they didn't, and that's what I think, Charlie and I hashed it out at home several times, like, wait a minute, these adult children are saying to the dad, we gotta go. We gotta get out of here. And they would not go. And you and I, Ann, talked about what the heck why wouldn't you protect your family if you knew? I mean, he had to know. He was a leader of the community, and he did know, but what made him stay? What made him not go and get on that lake, whatever that water was, they could have crossed into the other country? And and maybe been spared, but.
Right.
So
His responsibility to the whole
yeah,
village.
so that's what I want to talk about. I think that's like so important to know is like if you're a leader of the community or you're like leader of our church and you probably, I don't know, next to Charlie, you'd probably be like the last to go if somebody said the church is being burned down and you have this love of everybody like this dad did that's so deep and so responsible. And I think if people are leaders of the community or of just a group, or he's the leader of his family and the community, you just couldn't go.
Yeah, you couldn't leave.
You
couldn't
think
run
that's
away.
what his deal was, or was he just that blind?
No, I think you felt responsible. He's a leader.
Gosh,
He's been
but you wouldn't
given
even
that-
want to save your family.
Yeah, and his wife was, holding on to him at one point.
Yes,
Oh,
when-
yeah.
He's running, and she's
I know.
driving.
They really, most of us, well, I'll speak for myself, I react to anger and injustice, and this guy just rose above it.
Mm-hmm.
He really did. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no other way to put
Right.
it. He
Right.
just did. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting that she didn't even know what it meant to be Tootsie.
No.
She didn't even know what it meant.
No idea.
She at times cursed her being tall.
Yes.
Kind of what the
Tootsie's
thing was
were
that-
What can I do
Yeah.
about my home?
But then I think it's interesting too that you can tell she's starting to a little bit into the part one. She's starting to struggle with forgiveness a little bit.
Mhm.
It's she struggles with forgiveness, and she has righteous anger, and she's like, I'm kind of mad, but it's,
Right, right.
she didn't really know what to do, about it,
Mhm.
And they always prayed.
Well, and that's
How many
Yeah,
times
struck
did he
me
say,
about her.
Pray everything, pray that,
Pray for the math
that.
test. Yeah.
at such an
I
early
love
age.
that part of that.
Yeah.
She considered Mary her second mother. She said she
Right.
loved praying.
Hmm.
Yeah.
She loved going to church. At that age, I mean, how would that be instilled in a child that young? That
Yeah,
kind of, that
She's
was
the
another
example
thing.
of her parents doing
Exactly,
it and their
again,
trust.
right back to the parents, yeah.
I think that simplicity of life helps a lot too. Living in that village prior to the genocide, just taking care of nature and the things around them.
Right.
And their life was not real complicated, and they
Little
had
like
relationships.
Mayberry.
Yeah.
You're right.
Simple pleasures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Those
that
of you who are
street.
younger have to Google that, Mayberry.
Oh, you're right. They will have to.
We got any questions from anybody? Okay. Fire in your comments and your questions, folks.
Well, one thing I'd like to talk about a little bit is a little diversion from the book. But when I was on sabbatical in 2001, I was in Leuven, Belgium, at the Catholic University there. And I was on sabbatical, so it was wonderful. I could take classes and didn't have to take the tests or do the paperwork. It was great. I could just sit in on any class that I wanted to. And one of the classes was on ecclesiology, which is church. So this Jesuit priest, Hires was his name, was looking at the church as the role of reconciler, because Jesus came to reconcile the world to God and to each other. And if we're his followers, then we're supposed to be reconcilers as well. And so how do each of us as Christians reconcile? But then his view was, how does the church play a role in reconciling? So in that class were students from all over the world. And the second half of the semester, he broke the class down into groups that were supposed to explore different crises around the world where the church could have, should have played a more important role. Northern Ireland was one of them, Palestine is another, and Rwanda was one. And we had Hutus and Tutsis in that class. So both were there studying, because both were Catholics, but so these are, most of Rwanda was Catholic, and so they were Catholics killing each other, and what should have been the role, and it was interesting because this was 2001, so it's not that long after the
Right.
genocide,
No.
and so
Yeah.
having Hutus and Tutsis have to work together and then make a presentation to the class of what the role of the church should be. And I remember those students placed a lot of blame on Belgium. Belgium had gotten Rwanda after World War I. So it had been German before that, and then with the peace accord after World War I, they took all of Germany's colonies away from them. They gave Rwanda and Burundi to Belgium. Belgium didn't want it. They had the Congo right next door, the Belgian Congo, and they did not want Rwanda. But they sent the White Fathers in to try to Christianize Rwanda, because they thought, well, that'd make it easier for them to control. And that as they went in and evaluated, they thought that it was easier to put the Tutsis in control. They were easier to educate than the Hutus. And apparently, early on, that they were really not separate tribes. It was just what they did for a living. So the Tutsis were like, they raised cattle and sheep and managed that. The Hutus were more like agricultural farmers where they planted things. And that was really the only division, but they found the Tutsis to be easier to work with. So the Belgians put the Tutsis initially in charge and created a hierarchical kind of system there that was not their choosing. It was Belgium's choosing. And the church participated in that by enforcing this structure because they were all from Belgium. And the other thing that was kind of fascinating that the students said was they think that happened because Belgium is a divided country. Probably most people don't know this, but it's Dutch and French. It's divided by language, and they don't like each other.
Really?
They think the Dutch think the French are lazy. They live in the South. They don't do any work. All the best workers are the Dutch. In the North, they speak Flemish. In the South, they speak French. And there's this animosity between the two groups as to who has the most power and who's in charge. Even the school I went to, the Catholic University, about maybe 8 to 10 years before I got there, all the French speakers had left all those buildings and everything to form their own Catholic University in Louvain, the French name for the town, and built a new campus outside the city because they didn't think they were being treated correctly by the Dutch. And that was in the 90s. So I think, oh my gosh. So they saw the Belgian control of the country, which lasted from after World War I until after World War II. After World War II, there was this movement by the United Nations to get rid of the European colonization of Africa and make their own countries. So, interestingly, the church, a group, this is kind of pre-Vatican II, but there was a group from Belgium that was really into social justice, and they went down and organized the Hutus to fight for their rights. So the Catholic Church was also organizing the Hutus as well as the Tutsis, acting on both sides, and kind of fostered this Hutu rebellion that took place in the 50s, which is when those Tutsis left.
Left, yeah.
And they
Yeah,
would-
so that's what I was wondering about. So that's why they left.
And they weren't
Right.
allowed to come
And they
back.
couldn't come back, and so that's why they came, and then they looked like crazy rebels.
Right, from outside. So these Tutsis who had been living out of the country for
Just
so
wanted
many
to
years
come home.
Yeah.
wanted to come back. Right. But the Hutus had driven them out at that point. And then there were all kinds of skirmishes back and forth through the 60s, 70s, 80s. As she kind of talks about in the book, it's like, okay, they're fighting and they're not fighting and up until 94, or actually earlier than that, I think, when these Tutsis from outside the country were fighting to return. And the Hutus in charge at that point in time didn't like that and didn't want them, and so created this whole kind of negative attitude toward all Tutsis because they're probably aligned with these folks from outside. But fascinating to see the ripples of what the church failed to do and did. That because if you read some of the stories afterwards, there were priests and bishops and nuns who killed people,
Wow.
Hutus,
Really?
and then killed Tutsis. And there's one church had 3,000 Tutsis inside of it, and the priest organized the murder of all
Oh, wow.
3,000 inside. So you think,
That's heartbreaking.
yeah, so Pope Francis, just a few years ago, apologized to, I don't think it was just the Tutsis, but to all the people of Rwanda for what nuns and priests and the church did in the midst of that genocide, that they acted wrongly. And the Rwandan church, too, finally admitted guilt just a few years ago of saying we didn't act appropriately in any of this. We were wrong.
So what is about the United States of America? What were we, I don't know, I think I had babies at the time, or I didn't pay attention.
Well, that's what I was going to say. This seems like it went on for years.
What did we
And
do as a country
Early 90s.
in
Yeah.
the, I mean, we had to know millions of people were being
There was-
slaughtered.
Right.
And what did,
Yeah.
I mean, that's eye-opening for me to know the church didn't act, but now what, I don't know what was the United States doing. I have no idea.
Good
Nothing?
question.
No.
I don't think we did anything.
How could that be?
Yeah.
Same with the Holocaust. How could that happen? You know, I mean,
That's a good correlation
Yeah.
that
how could that? How could
Those
the
two
world let
together.
that go on?
Right.
Just one. I think it's one of those out of sight, out of mind things. I guess, you know.
For the Middle East, how we think.
Or we just don't, don't have value for us. Our economy isn't, we do more in the Middle East because we need their oil. Right. So
Right.
we gotta
Right.
go in and get,
Yeah, that part flabbergasted me too.
yeah.
There was a reference where they would call Immaculate's father Whitey. And you had mentioned that the White fathers initially had gone in.
Yeah.
I wonder if they kind of tied that together.
Word.
They may have, yeah, because she doesn't really say why he's
No.
called Whitey, but
No.
but he was running a Catholic school, which might have been the White Fathers, the missionaries, one of their schools, and so
Right.
that close connection with them.
Where was the? I think it was in. Yeah, it's in chapter 4, where she's on that bus.
Mhm.
And She decides to get
Yes.
off and wade in.
yes. Her faith.
My goodness. Talk
You
about
know.
that's either. It's either not very smart or. I mean, that's faith. I think you know,
Absolutely.
and how.
And her
brave.
brother was scared to death.
Yeah, yeah. Just unbelievable, really.
Well, her faith was tremendous, though. I mean, it's even
Crazy.
she said as a young girl, her dad would always tell her, "You can never say enough prayers." And whenever she was confronted, she had her dad's rosary that he gave her, and whenever she was confronted or thought she was going to be harmed, she would start praying, and she always seemed to come out of it.
Yeah.
And I thought that was quite her faith coming through there.
Mhm.
Because her boyfriend John, when they were witnessing the
The
Tutsi woman being
getting,
robbed
yes.
and assaulted, the Immaculate wanted to get involved in that. And
Yeah.
he told her, no, don't do it.
Right.
And I think the father, Immaculate's father, had John pegged from the beginning. He said,
He's a
because he knew he was
Protestant.
Protestant.
I love that. I love that part. She said
Don't
he
let
wasn't
him
concerned
convert
about
you.
him being a woman.
Yeah,
Don't
and
forget
don't
your
let
Catholic.
it, yeah.
Don't forget your.
Yeah, I love that.
And I think her eyes really were open to really how huge this was, and is when her girlfriend had the plant. She said, "You don't want to die at their hands." She said, "We're going to get into this electrical box
Yeah.
or building, and we'll just get electrocuted
Yeah.
instead of being." And then I think she's like, "Whoa, these
Yeah.
are barbarians."
Mm-hmm.
Well, the propaganda that was run,
Constantly.
it was amazing.
yeah.
It was constant. And they actually had the Hutus believing that the Tutsis were cannibals and
Yeah,
And had horns.
and they had
Yeah,
horns.
the whole
you know,
description.
Right.
cockroaches.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
calling them
And then later on, I think too, you have to see that. I think the dad. She doesn't say this, but when she was at school and he insisted that she come home for Easter,
Her
Right.
mom.
I think he kind of like maybe thought, I want to see her.
Mm-hmm.
There could be something going
Right.
Yeah,
on.
her
Right.
mom did too. She
Yeah.
she
Is
said
that when he begged her to come?
Begged
Yeah.
her to
Uh-huh.
come home for
As
Easter.
if he knew.
And she was kind of confused about it too. She was
Yeah.
like, I don't know why he's so
I
Yeah.
got these tests and I
yeah
have to study at
pushing so
home.
hard for that.
Right.
And then the older brother, Damascene, is that
Damascene.
Damascene? I think he sees what's happening before everybody
Yeah.
else. He kind of knows.
Yeah, he must have listening to a different radio station or something. He's like, oh, it's gonna be bad.
Tied into the wrong cable news network. But I think he does. He kind of foresees before everybody else. That seems like that anyway.
Right. We should all leave, get out of town, and we'll be safe. Go
Yeah.
across the lake.
Yeah.
And then I don't think it was like a lack of faith or anything, but the dad then all of a sudden, he's like, everybody, it's gonna be all right, and all the people are gathering by the thousands at his house.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says, well, maybe we should defend ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At first he kept on saying, it's gonna be fine. It's gonna be-"
Right. Right.
And he knew it wasn't gonna be fine, and he's like, let's defend ourselves.
Yeah.
And then they went away, and then they came back
Yeah.
with more numbers. But I just wonder what. I keep wondering what that guy was thinking, except back to the responsibility thing. But do you imagine having that many people counting on you?
And parked in your front yard.
The
Yeah.
thousands.
You
were-
know, what,
Yeah.
10,000 or something? Yeah. Can't imagine.
I think that kind of speaks to her naiveness too. Is the first thing she said when she saw that was like it was like a big picnic.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that? She said
Yeah.
it seemed like a picnic in our front yard. My gosh.
It's been a
Because he was
big front
keeping
yard.
everybody so
Yeah,
he was
really.
keeping everybody so calm. Because I think he had everybody.
I think
we're gonna
too,
get
it shows
through
us
this.
Right.
age doesn't correlate with wisdom sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was impressed with his encouraging them in the midst of all this danger to pray and to be reconciled. And then they got quiet.
They did, yes.
Yeah. His go-to was prayer all the
Yeah.
time, and so was hers, obviously from his.
Yeah, and to be able to do that in the midst of that fear.
Oh,
Because I was thinking, well, if there were people coming to kill me and my family and everybody around me,
You
Well,
would
you
want to
just try to
leave.
put
You'd want to
yourself-
get away.
yeah,
you would.
And then he sends her to the priest's
right,
house.
yeah,
And then later in part one,
Oh yeah, let's go to that.
talk about total chaos. I mean, just you can't. There's no way to imagine You know, the prime minister's on the radio and he's shot while he's on the radio. I mean, it's just, that's just total, complete chaos.
And imagine how she felt when she walked in that door of that priest's house and those people were giving her
The teacher
her
Janet.
teacher,
Yeah.
that great
Yeah.
teacher that
Yeah.
just kind of turned his
Humiliated
back
her.
on
Or
her.
whatever his name was.
Uh-huh.
imagine what she,
And that's also when she went up to the girlfriend and was so relieved to see her and gives her a big hug,
Yeah.
and she stands there
and she stands.
rigid
Yeah,
and grabs her purse and she says, "We aren't hiding you,"
yeah.
and
They're
leaves.
best friends.
Yeah.
And I too, one of the things that really touched me was when she saw her mom in the yard with the blanket on,
Yeah.
and she thought she looked like a corpse.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That was so prophetic. I thought, just like, wow, that's just kind of scary, you know. I don't know if she was foreseeing something there, or I think maybe when she was writing the book, she was maybe, maybe not. I don't know. I'm just
Well, certainly, I think she felt once she left and went away from her family that she'd probably never see them again.
She did say at one point that had she known that was the last meal they had together,
Yeah.
she'd have told them
Yes.
all how much she loved each
Yes.
of them. But
Yeah.
I got the feeling from the first part as well as the next few chapters that they were very loving to each other.
Oh
I
my
mean,
gosh, yeah.
They did everything together.
Right.
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 As you said,
Yeah.
they'd go down to the
yeah.
water
lake,
and,
yeah.
and it was paradise to all of them.
Yeah.
Especially to
They
the
joke with
sister.
each other and,
Yeah, they were tight.
but the father, it's like when he was put into prison by his neighbor, and then Immaculée came home and didn't know about it, and her mother said that but somebody had told her that your father is in prison, and so she hadn't talked to her mother yet. So here comes the protective part. When she comes home, she says, "Where's Dad?" And Mom says, "He's at work."
Yeah.
Well, Immaculée knowing that he was in prison. So then the father comes home and he tells the kids around the table, "Well, forget about it. It was a misunderstanding.
Yeah. It was
And
it was
you gotta-
politics.
You gotta forget about it. Just
Yeah.
forgive him." And the father's faith was
Yeah.
just astounding to me. I mean, and his forgiveness, as is Immaculee's.
Yeah.
But
And he told them at one point when all the people were in their yard, he said, "You're all overreacting." I think he told it to his
Yeah.
family.
Yeah.
"You're overreacting. It's just a political thing like it was in the past, and
Yeah.
it'll be okay." So I think he truly believed
well, I
that.
think his faith. He really thought
Yeah.
that was going to
Yeah.
get them through.
There'd be a good ending somewhere.
Right.
But then he goes to someone when they're all at his house. I don't remember who he went to ask him to send soldiers to help protect them. And it was the same guy that threw him in prison, wasn't it?
Yeah, they
And then
said.
he said that, so he sent 2 soldiers with him to go back to his house. And when they got there, the soldiers mocked him and laughed at him and
Yeah,
said,
like you really thought
"How
we were
could
gonna
you
protect
believe?
think that we're
Yeah,
gonna-
did you think we were really going to protect you?"
Reason and intelligence it didn't mean any, it just didn't mean anything.
No.
It was just complete, utter chaos.
Right.
The other thing that stood out to me is when she was very smart, or is very smart,
Yeah.
and she got these scholarships, and initially was turned down because she was a woman, and then even when she did excel to the point where they accepted her, they put her in a major field of
Yeah, she
teaching
couldn't
that
even
didn't want.
choose what area.
You're right.
They put her in science and
Uh-huh.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, even though they did accept her,
They
at the
told her
higher
what she
level,
was gonna
they still
study.
Had control over what she was gonna
Right.
study.
And I thought too, I don't know if it was in chapter 7 or chapter 8, when she shakes Damascene's hand and says, like, it's like a disappearing soul. It felt
Oh,
like a
yes.
disappearing soul.
When they had to leave the priest's house that night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that was that seemed almost prophetic too, you know.
Mhm.
I think maybe and I'm surprised she didn't say that in the book, that I kind of felt that, you know. I guess when she says a disappearing soul, that's what she meant, but, you know, well,
Well, in one part of that book, she even said, if I thought about never seeing my family again, I would have fallen apart. So I never ever wanted to think that I wasn't going to see him again.
yeah.
Yeah, you have to have some reason for going on to
Right,
have hope. So
right.
to tell yourself,
Mhm.
I'll see him.
Yeah.
I'll see him.
Yeah,
wonder
she
if
stayed
you-
calm like that.
If you're a person that, I mean, the name of the book. Like, I wonder if there was a point when this was so bad. Like, of course, I've read the rest of the book years ago, and so I mean, we kind of all know what happens. But like, I wonder if there's a point where you get like a inspired or a feeling that I'm gonna live, and I'm supposed to do something with this,
Mm-hmm.
or I mean, you know.
Well, which makes me
I'm-
go back to her name. And what did it mean, shining? They
Yeah.
gave her
Yeah,
a
the
name,
phrase
and
that they
I
used
keep
on it
thinking
was
that has something to do with
Beautiful in body and soul.
Yes.
Yeah,
shining.
as she watched people, die around her, if she said, because when you have a lot of faith, I think, when you have experiences in your life or things happen to you in your life, at least I do, it's like you feel like, what am I supposed to be, I'm supposed to be doing something with this.
Good.
I'm supposed to be doing something with this, either
Yeah.
now or later, or, so I bet you she
Mhm.
had
a feeling.
feeling.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But I think that's such an important thing for all of us to come to when we have crises or suffering or those kind of things in our life, that while we're in the midst of it, it doesn't seem like a gift, and it doesn't
Right.
seem like there's nothing I can do with this. But the reality is, yes, there's somebody out there needs you, and you have that experience, and so you now can share something or do something or be
Right.
God's grace for them. It's to see that there's a reason for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This makes sense.
Oh, so when they're at the priest's house and he takes her, or she goes to the sister's bedroom, and then it's still that night. All of a sudden, he walks in with 6 more women.
Right.
So did they must have just been running and went
Came
to the priest's house
as well.
too.
Yeah.
And then to stand in a room with all these women, 3 by 4.
Yeah, but we don't know that yet, do we?
That's coming next.
Oh, is that the
Next
next?
week.
Oh, I did read one chapter too many.
Because they're hiding in the
They're
attic.
hiding. That's right.
Because they hear the
Like
people outside looking for them, and they're trying to figure out what are we going to do, and so
They went to the attic.
they went to the attic, and the pastor has kept them away right then, and then he comes in to look for them. Where are you? We're up here.
Ooh.
No questions or comments or anything?
Just a few comments about the love for her brothers. The letter she wrote to her brother when he was in college, and the love
Oh,
for
yeah.
Damascene, and just the positive parenting. Many were very impressed by that.
Well,
And one thing I did, and aside from the father, the mother, she always worried.
She always worried.
Well,
She was always worrying. So I mean, it's
Yeah.
like she knew,
yeah,
but again, wanted to keep those kids,
yeah. I thought it was.
alienated from all of the things that she worried about.
Right.
At one point, she said mom was the comforter, dad was the protector.
Mm-hmm.
Right,
You
right.
know,
Oh,
that's kind of the way,
so many
kind of the way
families.
we did a lot of
A lot of
families,
households
isn't
are
it
like-
the truth?
Yeah. Well, and their willingness to see her go off to that boarding school
Right.
when she's so young, and think, and
Yeah, that's tough. I
and
know.
the rest of the family there too. I think that's got to be hard to their
Didn't
high
the
school.
dads sell a couple goats or something?
Two
Two
cows.
Two
Cows.
cows,
Two
yeah.
cows.
Two
To
cows.
get her
pay
to
for
go
the
there,
school.
yeah.
And those are very valuable.
Right.
But that's like how that the things like that. Like he knew the importance of
Education.
of education, and then us particularly of a woman
Yeah.
being educated. Because and she said too. She says I know she knew how women were treated who had no education.
Right.
And that literally was their top two things,
Yep.
morals and education.
Yep.
It really
And
was.
so, I think that, they just, it is like it was like just
Right.
paradise. It's so sad that the family had to
And
end like that, but.
anything else? Anybody? Thanks very much. That was
Thank
fun.
you.
It
Yeah.
was fun.
Thank you
join
for
us.
your Belgian insight there. That was
That's very
Yeah.
interesting.
It's a
Yes.
surprising little
Makes-
thing of,
very interesting.
sitting in that classroom and thinking, okay, I
Did they
need.
get along pretty good then, Father,
They
two
got,
students?
so they had to present together, so the
Oh.
professor divided them all up into groups, and since I was on sabbatical, I didn't have to. I could just listen, and think, oh, I'm so thankful I don't have to make a
Did they identify
presentation.
themselves
Yeah,
as a Tutsi and a
Hutus
Hutu?
or Tutsis, yeah.
Wow.
That was
Yeah.
good though. That was very good.
Yeah, and very real, because it was right there. I think, okay, this is not far away.
Right.
This is close.
What
and-
about the Twas, the third group? I know it was just a small percentage, but
They never
they
said.
weren't victimized, were they?
No. They were probably victimized hundreds and hundreds of years earlier when the Hutus and Tutsis moved into that area, because the Twa were the first people in Rwanda, in that part of the world, and then these others came in from
Okay.
outside. So. But there's a very small percentage.
Yeah.
So in our community, do we have any from either tribe?
I'm not aware of any.
Or-
We have several different tribes from Sudan in both the parish and in the school. And recently we haven't had any incidents of conflict, but so early on when I came here, probably 6 years ago, there were groups of boys that would get into fights in the grade school, the junior high, because they were from different tribes. Yeah.
Wow.
Huh.
Huh.
Yeah, and I can never get the names of the tribes, but if you ask the kids, they'll tell you what language they speak at home, and which is their tribal language, and so
Oh,
what
okay.
tribe they're from.
Well, this
So
was
it
fun.
just carried on. I mean, from their standpoint,
Yeah,
those
Yeah.
kids in school here, they learn from their parents.
Sure.
And
Right.
sure.
The wonderful thing with our kids is that so many of them want to go back to South Sudan and help the people back there. So
Really?
I get an education here, then I can go back, I can be an engineer, I can be a
Right.
lawyer, I can be a doctor, and I can go back there and I can help them. And like that one fellow in the parish, his kids are in the school, we don't see him all that often. But he's trying to build that orphanage in the village that he's from in South Sudan, and he has the land, and he's put up a couple buildings, and he's put up a couple bathrooms, but right now a lot of the kids are just sleeping outside. But he has like 20 acres the government gave him to build an orphanage on. And
Wow.
Oh, that's so
We
noble.
had some about that in the bulletin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he was
Then we never heard
collecting, yeah, he collected money from us. We had a second collection for him last summer to go down and build bathrooms, I think was what the goal was last summer. But,
You all good?
you know,
Yeah.
Can I read one to you? I would write
Sure.
it, but I can't write all these words fast enough. This is from Jamie, one of our viewers. She says, Father mentioned that oftentimes our times of crisis prepares us to help others. He said it so beautifully that I'm curious if there's anyone in this panel that has had a life crisis that they've used to reach out to others. I love hearing other people's stories. Would anyone care to share?
And
Yes. Well, after Sam passed away, I was listening to a TV show, and Kathy Lee Gifford was on, and she talked about this book, More Beautiful Than Before, and it's written by a Jewish rabbi. So I gave it to Ann Lenz to read, and she said, "Oh my gosh, do you want to be on our bereavement group?" And this is such a beautiful book. So I take that book to people that have lost someone. I mean, it's a few months after. Ann and Doug do their thing, and then I follow up. And sometimes I'm not on time, within the 3 or 4 months, but I've had, or Ann has told me that people have reached out to her and said that that book has just meant so much to them when they've read it. So that's kind of, I love doing it, and I love to get the feedback. Charlie even told me when he read it, he said, "Good book."
yeah,
Great.
I lost 2 brothers inside of 6 months, and then
Right.
that made a big difference.
Yeah, it really did to me too. It was probably a year after Sam had passed away that I thought, I listened to her, and she said it's such a beautiful book, so I thought, I'm going to order that, and it really, really, I thought, helped me a lot. So I thought, maybe it'll help other people too.
Thank you again.
You're welcome.
So part 2?
next
time?
week,
Next week.
just part 2.
We'll have new
Yeah.
guests, unfortunately,
The B team.
or fortunately.
Yeah, that's right. We got to be the A-team.
Well, thanks for being with us, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank
Been
you.
fun.
Yep.
See you next
Good.
week.
Good night.